As a huge fan of the Dead Island series ever since it initially released, it only made sense for me to gravitate towards Dying Light. Made by the same studio, Techland, Dying Light pushed what made Dead Island so great, doubling down on brutal first-person zombie killing and adding a larger emphasis on parkour and the importance of platforming. It was a great combination, and one I found myself falling in love with all over again in Dying Light the Beast. The game is wonderful so far, and I'm having a blast diving into Dying Light's fantastic gameplay again. It's just as good and gorgeous as I remember. However, I've only had access for a few days, so I unfortunately haven't had the chance to play through the entire game for our review. Still, I wanted to take a moment to touch up and see if it's going to be playable on the Steam Deck based on the first few hours of the game, especially with the confusing system requirements they published. So, that's going to be the focus of today's video. We're going to check out Dying Light the Beast, the first few hours on the Steam Deck, and whether we think it's going to be playable on the go. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that like and subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as our next video goes live. A huge thank you to Techland for providing a key for us to review. Thank you. Starting off in Dying Light the Beast left me with some mixed feelings. On one hand, performance was showing some great signs to start, but I quickly learned that the game was defaulting frame generation on. So I went ahead and turned it off, which did bring the frame rate down, but still kept it above a playable rate. The initial prologue kept us in a lab, so the real test for performance came after it, where we had to go out into the open world and head into a monastery to establish our first safe house. On the way there was a range of frame rates, going upwards into the 40s and sticking around the 30s. However, it almost never went below 30 frames per second. At the monastery, the only time it consistently stuck below 30 was when we were fighting our first chimera, which had some camera angles that would drop the frame rate to 25 frames per second. After that, I was free to start exploring the open world, and I was happy. The game stuck above 30 frames per second the whole time, with some areas spiking in battery drain to 20 watts and others sticking around 17 to 18. I was running around the camping town and the city with ease, and there was only one actual drop I experienced in the city during the daytime while fighting 12 zombies at a time. There were also stutters when running around quickly, especially jumping from rooftop to rooftop in the larger city. It never got too bad, but there was one time where the game froze for a full second. Based on the experience so far, I'd say the game is playable for the most part, with some possibility of stuttering and drops in busy moments. This will only really happen outside, since inside areas run very well, and the deck was handling 10 plus enemies on screen all at once. It will just start to drop when there's too much happening past that, or fighting off so many enemies in a very detailed area. It all looked very decent as well on the default settings, and I ended up preferring either TAAU or XeSS upscaling for my favorite visuals at performance. The default settings on the Steam Deck range from low level of detail, shadows and ambient occlusion to medium particles and motion blur with high textures and lots of other effects turned on. It's a really solid offering for the default. The game also has a lot of options to change, and there were a few I tested initially to start. For a quick disclaimer, when I review games, I tend to stick to the default until I find stress points where I optimize for, and other than that one chimera fight, I haven't really found one. However, there were two specific options I wanted to test and find out what the best performance were: renderer mode and upscaler. These two would have rippling effects across the entire game, so I wanted to see which was showing better signs in the beginning. The game comes with support for DirectX 11 and 12, and while DirectX 12 offers more options like more upscalers and frame generation, DirectX 11 tends to run a little bit better on the Steam Deck. However, this isn't really the case here. Ultimately, performance was about the same between DirectX 11 and 12, and with the extra offerings that come from 12, I felt it was best to just stick there instead. Then comes the upscalers. The game has support for TAAU, XeSS, and FSR 2 and 3, so I decided to test all of them and see which is best. For my testing, all on performance mode, I found that TAAU and XeSS are slightly better than FSR here, but TAAU is slightly better compared to both. It was very minor, with a 0.2 watt difference in some cases, but still a difference. In a game like this, where it's very open, tons of enemies can be on screen, any sort of improvement is going to be welcome. Because of this though, I would say it's mild enough to choose whatever upscaler you want to. With all the tests and articles we wrote over the past few days about FSR 4 getting leaked and usable on the Steam Deck, I also decided to see if FSR 4 is recognized and works, and I can say that yes it does. Using the Decky frame gen method, I was able to inject and use FSR 4. The game already has support for FSR 4 and has a specific toggle for it as well, but it had some issues when I tried to do it in-game. I highly recommend, if you're going to be using this method, do not go to FSR in-game under any circumstance. Stick to XeSS or TAAU. Though if you're going to be using OptiScaler, go to XeSS so you can actually use OptiScaler, and then from there, change to FSR4. In the case of visuals, it does look a little bit better than XeSS, but not a huge difference overall. We'll be going more into detail of that in a different video though. I also decided to test lossless scaling frame generation, which I feel does work a little bit better than the in-game FSR frame gen. It still introduced some input lag, and there were some stutters and slowdowns felt, but it wasn't consistent. Ultimately, I still preferred 30 frames per second without frame generation over 50 to 60 with lossless. It felt smoother and more consistent, there were fewer stutters, and virtually no input lag. Still, I want to commend the devs here since the FSR frame gen implementation is not bad. Prior to release, I was honestly worried about playing Dying Light the Beast on the Steam Deck. It sounded like the CPU requirements may be too much for it, but I was wrong. From my time with it so far, it has been stable, looks solid, and has been a blast to enjoy. I was surprised by the default settings, automatically setting some to high and medium, and while there were some minor drops here and there, it rarely moved from 30 frames per second in general gameplay. Frame generation works okay, though it introduces more drops in input lag than I would like, and FSR4 is okay. Still, I'm happy to say that with what I've played so far, Dying Light the Beast is going to be great to play on the Steam Deck, especially if it continues on as is. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as our next video goes live. And a huge thank you to our patrons. You guys are awesome. See you next time.